but we are having this round table called New Heritage and New Threats. And we have a cluster of 3 very interesting projects to hear from this afternoon. One called Shield, Procraft and New Space. And you will have the full titles in your agenda, so I won't waste time reading it to you. All 3 deal with, to a different degree, with human and environmental interactions with materials, requiring a cross-disciplinary approach in your endeavors, and promising also to engage with a range of end users, stakeholders, and communities. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your presentations. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I will give very short introductions to all the 3 speakers. You all have 10 minutes. I'm afraid I'm going to be very strict because I would like us to have time for discussion. After 9 minutes, I will interrupt you to indicate that you have 1 minute left so that you can wrap up. Is that clear, please? Yes? Excellent. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, and his name is Dante Abate. With a background in the humanities, Dante's research activities are focused on digital technologies for cultural heritage and conservation and protection. In 2019, Dante started his current post at the APAC laboratories of the Cyprus Institute as an associate research scientist, leading the 2D, 3D documentation and multispectral imaging lab. Dante, over to you, please, to introduce your project.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Shall I share my screen first? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, basically, again, thank you very much for the invitation. As May introduce me, I'm an associate research scientist at the moment at the Cyprus Institute, and I mean, for this meeting, I'm the project leader of the Shield project. I'm speaking, of course, on behalf also of my colleagues that belongs to the Shield project. Both the Shield project is composed of 3 partners. One is the Cyprus Institute, which is leading. Then we have a partner from Italy, which is Fondazione Bruno Kessler, and a partner from Portugal, which is the Institute Tech Research Center. Basically, the Shield project, as you know, looting and the illegal archaeological excavation are a huge problem, a big threat to archaeology and heritage, the heritage domain. Basically, besides being a crime itself, it brings with it all the problems that belongs to archaeology itself. Let's say that when they do illegal excavation, they don't care about the context. The main aim is just to extract the artifacts and then to sell them illegally on the market. This is a crime which is horizontal crime. Basically, it affects almost everybody, and we have to stress the fact that it doesn't affect only failed state scenarios, but unfortunately, it goes all through Europe, and I think it's worldwide. From the legislative point of view, we have an extremely solid background. I mean, we have a lot of law to enforce trying to stop this kind of phenomenon. I just want to mention the Hague Convention in its 2 protocols, 1954 and 1999, and the last one, which is it was basically established in 2017, and it's called, and it's known as the Nicosia Convention. Also at the EU level, basically, it's very well known that this kind of crime is the money coming from this kind of crime, as it's used to fund illegal activities and also terrorism. So it's very very hot topic. At the moment, we have the legislative framework, but we have problem in using tools that are effective in stopping this kind of artificial illegal excavations. So basically now I go to the topic to the core of the project that I'm leading. The SHIELD project basically aim to design and build an artificial intelligent unmanned aerial system, which is able to patrol archaeological and heritage sites using technologies such as live data streaming, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and flight data management. Just to give an update on the state of the project itself, the project started last September of the 2020. At the moment, we just finished to design and build the unmanned aerial system, and then you can see a picture of the design itself and a step in the processing of assembling the system. At the same time, our partners are starting to explore which are the best artificial intelligence algorithms to tackle the problem of identifying illegal excavation. So basically, how this, which is the methodology which is behind the SHIELD project. So basically, the aim is to build this UAV, which is housed in a self-contained helipad. This helipad is located in remote areas, let's say, where it's difficult for law enforcement to go on daily basis, or because we are not talking about, let's say, extremely big archaeological site, but still the archaeological site that need to be preserved. So we want to locate the system in a, let's say, a remote area. The system is self-contained and is able to take off, patrol the area, stream the data, land and recharge the batteries, and at the same time wait for the next scheduled mission. At the moment that the system identifies a threat, an alarm system basically is created, and the law enforcement are advised. By the moment the law enforcement are advised, then it's up to them to go there and patrol the area. This basically, it's also used as a deterrence strategy, because if we hope that if the looters knows that there is something that is watching and is flying above the head, maybe, and let's say that maybe, they may refrain themselves to basically do this kind of criminal activities. So basically, the SHIELD project, the impact of the SHIELD project, there are several impacts. The first one is to optimize the man efforts, because of course, police forces in all the countries, they have a special unit dedicated to heritage, but of course the budget is very limited, and also the number of people that they can deal with the protection of archaeological sites is very limited. As I said, we are not talking about protecting or controlling the Acropolis of Athens. Here we are talking about remote archaeological sites which are maybe in the countryside, in place difficult to access, so the police cannot go there every day and check it. At the same time, we try to increase the response and the success of the public authorities at the illicit excavation, because every time they are supposed to receive an alarm from the system, they can act in a timely manner to go there and try to enforce the law. Of course, this then will help them to protect archaeological site, and this one was a problem that was very, very strongly felt by law enforcement, Department of Antiquities during the COVID, because of course most of the law enforcement still actually they are deployed to make the checks that people are wearing masks, the venues are respecting the number of people. So this basically drain resources for the protection of archaeological heritage. So basically from my side, I hope I was in time, maybe I was even shorter than allowed. This was from my side, and if you have any questions, please feel free to answer.
Very good. You've started us well, because you have another 2.5 minutes. I'll use that time to ask you a question, if I may. It is in a remote location. However, looters can also be violent. If they get used to seeing the drone around, what is to stop them from attacking the drone? And is there an alarm system that then can be triggered to ensure that the authorities know that the drone is no longer operational?
Well, basically, of course, if they bring a rifle and they try shooting drones, this is something we cannot prevent, not even protect the drone. I mean, it's not like bulletproof the drone, that's for sure. I mean, the way try to avoid this, we are scheduling the missions, we are thinking to schedule the mission randomly, so they shouldn't expect, and also flying at a certain altitude, that the drone is, let's say safe, but at the same time is able to collect the data, analyze the data, and trigger the alarms when there is an alarm. Of course, we can have some false positive if we are using other kind of parameters. But to get back to your question, if they want to bring down the drone, I assume they can somehow, shooting with a rifle like they shoot birds. But at the same time, the drone is supposed to stream data continuously. So if there is a stop in streaming, we know that something is wrong.
Okay, thank you very much, Dante. That's very interesting, and a very interesting response to my question as well, which I think was a rather difficult one, I have to say. So thank you for handling it very well. Thank you very much. We will now move on to our next speaker. So we'll move from heritage technologies to heritage materials in their own right. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Elodie Guillemot, who is a conservation scientist at Archaeological Laboratory in Nantes in France. Her research interests include the corrosion of metals and the development of restoration treatments. She coordinated many national research programs applied to conservation and conducted several research on the alteration and conservation on a range of metals, lead, iron, copper alloys, silver, and also, most appropriately for this particular project, aluminium alloys. So over to you.
Thank you. So today I would like to present the ProCraft project to you. This project concerns the protection and conservation of aircraft heritage, and more particularly the heritage of World War II aircraft. In the ProCraft project, we are 5 main partners. I'm a coordinator and I work at Archaeological Lab, and it's a lab for the restoration and conservation of archaeological objects in Nantes in France. The other partners are universities or research laboratories. The CMS lab in Toulouse, in France, is an expert in materials analysis, particularly of aluminium alloys, and has developed significant knowledge of historical aluminium alloys. We work with 2 Italian universities. The University of Ferrara is an expert in electrochemistry and develops innovative protection in collaboration with the University of Bologna, expert in heritage materials. And Czech University of Prague developed environmental modeling to optimize the preventive conservation of aircraft in large spaces. For this JPI of ProCraft, we collaborate with many third parties. We have 20 third parties. There are air museums, associations with volunteers, and public structures involved in the conservation of this cultural heritage from France, Italy, Greece, and Czech Republic. They are very involved in the conservation of aircraft wrecks, so they are mainly interested in the result of ProCraft, but they can also provide help with their knowledge of this cultural heritage, with donating or loaning artifacts, and with participating in valorization such as of display and dissemination. For us, it's very important to include them in the ProCraft project. Together with the different actors, we want to improve the knowledge about this World War II aircraft wrecks, and we want to propose suitable conservation restoration methods because their works are mainly made of aluminium alloys, which is a new material in archaeology. The treatments are still to be tested and validated. One of the objectives of this is to propose an innovative protection for aluminium alloys. Aircraft are often stored in uncontrolled environments due to their large size. We want to take these constraints into account in ProCraft and especially in preventive conservation. And we explained before the main actors managing this heritage at this moment are often volunteers. We want to use the ProCraft result to create guidelines for non-professionals. ProCraft methodology is based on the process chain from the excavation to museum. Thus, Work Package 2 is the first step of the discovery of the aircraft wreck with a study and historical and scientific documentation. The Work Package 3 concerns the development of restoration treatments, and the Work Package 4 and 5 focus on the creation and validation of protection of aluminium alloys. The Work Package 6 suggests the new preventive conservation solution for aircraft wrecks to store or display them in the good conditions. And the last Work Package is working on the valorization of the World War II aircraft heritage using the result from ProCraft. With these different actions, ProCraft will improve shared knowledge about World War II aircraft. ProCraft will contribute to preservation and conservation, in particular of these new materials, aluminium alloys. And ProCraft will promote the dissemination and presentation of World War II aircraft heritage to the public. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elodie. You used half your allocated time. That's very efficient. Yes. I have a question for you, and I'm sure there may be other questions will come up in the chat. So I'd like to use some of the time to ask you a question. When you're dealing with large and composite objects, such as aircraft, you have identified in your project description that there are other materials that are present in an aircraft apart from aluminium. So when you treat the aluminium of an aircraft, how do you isolate the other materials so that it allows you to treat the aluminium effectively?
Sorry, my colleague is Jan.
Okay. Hi.
Hello.
Because Elodie, she's well, we try to respond as best as we can. So for the first time, at the moment, the first question, it's really basic one, is we are not able to treat and restore aluminium alloy. Not even, we need, at the first time, we need to understand how the coercion product held, and it's the first step. And for the moment, all the parts that we are studying are without any other materials. It's only aluminum alloy. Because if we put in the problem all the conservation of all materials, including leather or artificial materials, iron or what any other part, it will be so much complex to treat. So for the first step, because even in one plane, you can have like 4 or 5 different type of aluminum alloys who can be in different state and will need a special treatment for each of these parts. So in a wing, for example, you could have 3 different aluminum alloy for just one wing, and depends of the plane from which country it's from. because aluminium alloy is different from USA, it's different from Germany, it's different from Italy. So the first step is to know this alloy and to understand how the corrosion processing, okay? Then the second step, it will be how will you restore it and protect it. And then after that, at the end of the project, maybe we can focus on the large scales of other materials.
No, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We study a little the composite with the iron and aluminium part, because we have a lot of part of aircraft with the two materials. So we begin to see iron and aluminium, but just for this project.
No, thank you very much. That's very clear indeed. We have a little bit more time, and I'd like to return to Dante, because, so thank you very much, Elodie. Dante, I'd like to come back to you because I missed a question in the chat line, if I may. And the question was, first of all, the comment was that your presentation was very interesting. Could the software that you will use be used for the same purpose, but using satellite images?
Okay, we have our Italian partner from Bruno Castel Foundation is developing and customizing a specific algorithm that is going to tackle the problem. So basically the drone, as I said, will fly at a specific altitude. At the moment, our colleagues are testing images taking, if I'm not mistaken, 3,600 meters in this range. And the purpose is to collect the image and spot on, to identify on spot what is going on the ground. Mainly we will tackle, when these looters go on ground, they are cluster of 3-4 persons and maybe a pickup part next to them. So I'm not sure that these things can be identified at the scale of satellite images. Maybe yes, but probably a proper algorithm should be customized to use those kinds of input data. So in principle, yes, but for the scale of our project at the moment, we are going at a lower altitude. But I would invite Fabio, that is online, is my colleague from Italy, to reply on the chat with more details, just in case.
Thank you, Dante. I'm sure it'll generate a lot of discussion. Thank you. And I'd like now to turn to our third project, which is New Space. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Egle Ringevichute, who is Associate Professor of Criminology and Sociology in the Department of Criminology and Sociology in Kingston University, London. Before going to Kingston, she worked at Linköping and Gothenburg universities in Sweden and Sciences Po in Paris. In addition to New Spaces, she is the principal investigator of a research project, Nuclear Cultural Heritage, From Knowledge to Practice, which will end in 2022, which is funded by the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council. So over to you, Egle.
Thank you very much, May, for this introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. I will now try to share my screen. Right. Here we go. So it is my pleasure to introduce the research project Nuclear Spaces, Communities, Materialities, and Locations of Nuclear Cultural Heritage. And we started this project, like all of us, this year, and we hope to go on for 3 years. Just a few words about the background of this project. One of the reasons why we are so excited about this funding scheme and this particular research grant is because we've been working, so to speak, towards this project with this particular team for quite a long time, developing our stakeholders as well as research agendas and establishing international collaborations. So this funding scheme is really enabling us to take the next step forward and hopefully to strive for not only research, but also impacts and impact-oriented results. So one of the projects which forms the background for new spaces is a research project developed by Professor Anna Storm in Sweden, which looked at a set of different countries and different cultural, political, and technical legacies of nuclear decommissioning. In parallel, I have developed a research network here in the UK, but with international ambition, to bring together stakeholders from nuclear establishments. And by nuclear establishments, I'm referring to very different sites. So this could be nuclear power plants, which are being shut down and dismantled. This could be nuclear defense sites like old airports or missile shafts, or this could be research reactors, nuclear research facilities, which have reached the end of their life cycles and are being shut down. Now, the thing with these nuclear sites is that they kind of fall, and they fall in a very interesting space. So they could be considered industrial heritage, but they are not always seen as such by the nuclear industry themselves. And many of actors in the nuclear industry, both military and civil, by law, they are tasked to operate those facilities safely. As you can imagine, there are all sorts of risks attached to those facilities. And then to decommission, to shut down them safely, and to clean up the place from possible contamination. Preservation of elements of those spaces poses not only a material challenge in terms of cleaning up radioactivity, but also cultural and one can say a challenge for imagination, thinking what do they mean, what do these places, how do they fit in the local culture and community that emerged throughout the time of building and operating those places. So far we've been exploring this problem space and making contacts with different stakeholders and developing the agenda. And the team is international, so we are based in Kingston University in London, as well as in Sweden and Lithuania. Right. Now, the objectives of New Spaces project is very much motivated by the recent developments in heritage studies, but also in the history of science and technology, as well as, I would say, more general sociological and political studies of what could be called the age of the Anthropocene, dealing with new situations that the industrial development in the 20th century resulted. So we will be looking into 3 types of case studies. So the first work package will be looking at nuclear roots, understanding local nuclear cultural heritage. So we will be looking into how members of local communities that emerged around nuclear power plants, which are undergoing decommissioning, how do they understand their cultural heritage that they have created through their everyday lives, and what aspects of those facilities we want to preserve. We will also look at nuclear roots, or rather the flows of cultural imaginaries which value nuclear power as culturally important, not just economically important. And we will also look at policies. What kind of policy innovation is required to facilitate the making of nuclear cultural heritage? So how cultural ministries and heritage boards could collaborate with the nuclear industry, which is new for all of them. Now, our research methodology is mainly based around qualitative research projects. So we will be doing some of fundamental research in terms of ethnographic fieldwork, archival research, interviewing with local communities and stakeholders. And we will also run schemes of collaborative workshops between heritage professionals, communities, and the representatives of the nuclear industry in 3 sites in Lithuania, Sweden, and Dunrey. So we will have pleasure of going to remote and very interesting places such as Ignalina in Lithuania, Barsebäck, which is close to Malmö in Sweden, and also Sellafield and Dunrey in the UK. our expected impacts are quite manifold. So we will work throughout the project very closely with our associate partner organizations. And one of our expected impacts is establishing relations between these institutions, which don't exist yet. So we will try to find constructive ways in which nuclear establishments, local councils, and principal science and technology museums, but also local museums could develop their collaboration with the aim to ask what does nuclear cultural heritage mean for those particular communities, but also what does it mean nationally and internationally. So we'll try to work at all these three levels, local, national, and international. And I will stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much. That again was well below time. So you've given me a very easy task here. I have a question for you, if I may, Egle, before we enter into the discussion period. And I noticed that in the slide that you showed your associate partner organization, you've got a nice balance between museums and nuclear authorities. Obviously, that is deliberate, but out of all the heritage organizations you've chosen, why did you choose museums as a partner?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much, May, for this question. It's really a very, very good question. So as you see, we're planning to work with professional heritage organizations. So we will engage communities, but our principal partner are, so to speak, these formal heritage institutions. And the reasons why is because we have like two goals as part of this research project. So one of them is to make sure that material culture that has emerged from nuclear establishments and communities surrounding them, that elements of them do not disappear when these establishments are being closed down, when reactors are dismantled, cut into pieces, or put into storage as radioactive waste. So what could be preserved as part of material culture, the history of science and technology. But it's not only about what the professional heritage field can get from the nuclear industries by way of this collection and documentation. What has transpired during the preparatory work for this project is that the nuclear industry has a lot to learn from professional heritage institutions when it comes to gathering and documenting material culture, especially working with non-traditional, non-documentary sources of information. Because a very big part of nuclear decommissioning involves gathering information about what is being decommissioned. And this is part of safety cases. This is part of safe management of radioactive materials. And as you can imagine, throughout decades and decades of operation, nuclear power plants, they have generated all sorts of materials, which actually are material witnesses of different activities within the organization, not all of which necessarily have been documented. Or if they were documented, it doesn't necessarily mean that these documents have to be contextualized in order to understand what they mean. So, and that's an unexpected moment which transpired from this preparatory work, that there is a huge interest from the nuclear industry, from the archivists particularly, to learn from museums of science and technology methods in information management and maybe preserving samples of material cultures as part of safety cases. So there is this targeted collaboration that we seek to develop, in addition to obvious enrichment of the local depositories of exhibits.
Thank you
and
very
possible
much.
Exhibitions.
I'm glad I asked the question. It's a very interesting response. Thank you. I now would like to address the participants, because there are many of you out there that I can't see, but there are at least 65. I'd like you to begin to think about, because in the last 15 minutes of this roundtable, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions. You can ask questions now, but there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions and for the speakers to respond. And you have about 9 minutes in order to think about what kind of questions am I asked, because the first thing I'm going to do over the next 9 minutes is ask the speakers to engage in a discussion on some topics that they themselves have highlighted to me they would like us to talk about. And the first topic that I would like to address to the speakers is I have been impressed and I've noticed the cross-disciplinarity, the cross-disciplinary nature of the projects that you will be developing. So you will have a range of disciplines that will be involved in all of your projects. So I work in an interdisciplinary environment, in a cross-disciplinary environment. So I would very much like to hear your views on the challenges that you expect to face when exploring, collaborating across different sectors and across different disciplines. And maybe I could start with Dante. If you were the first person to speak, maybe I could ask you whether you could reflect over a couple of minutes. What challenges do you think that working across different sectors and across different disciplines might present you with in your project?
Well, as you mentioned at the very beginning, my background is in archaeology, so I didn't have a technical background as a default. So especially from a humanities point of view, working, I mean, it started becoming mandatory working with other professionals coming from other domains, because of course we cannot deal with, in my case, let's say, with doing artificial intelligence, machine learning and stuff like this. But I think that we reach a stage now that is mature enough for the digital humanities, as they call it, to have this like kind of multidisciplinary environment. The main challenge sometimes is not to work with colleagues across different domains, but when we go out and to reach out with stakeholders, because sometimes they want to understand what's going on, and sometimes it's not easy enough for us to explain it in a way that they can understand it and then sell it. Because in our case, let's say we are dealing a lot with, let's say, law enforcement, police, Department of Antiquities, and then the Department of Antiquity has to go up to the ministry, let's say, to the Minister of Finance to tell them, listen, this year we don't need a budget of X amount of euros, we need less because we have this system. But to explain to the ministry what we are going to do is not as easy as we think. So I think the biggest challenge is when we go out with stakeholders to explain them basically what we are doing and how to sell it.
That was going to be another question that I was going to be referring to, which is no. I think it's great. It's absolutely fantastic that, because the involvement of end users and stakeholders presents its own issues as well. So keeping it at the moment with, and I think I will open it up, in fact, because there isn't much time. So if, for example, if I could ask the second speaker, I'm trying to remember your name and it'll come to me in a minute. It is Elodie. If I could ask Elodie, please, thank you. If you could reflect on the challenges of either working with other stakeholders or, in fact, within your project team or wider project group, how different disciplines might view the work that you're doing, and whether language also becomes an issue, that you think you are speaking the same language, because that is what I find, that we think we are agreeing, we think we're using the same language, but we mean something different. So what kind of challenges do you envisage? So, I think
I will speak for Elodie if you allowed me.
Yes, of course.
She's my colleague and we are both coordinating this project. So,
would you like to introduce yourself and tell us your name?
So my name is Jane Ishina, and I'm a head of the lab who is in charge of the coordination of this project.
Fantastic. Carry on.
So the first challenge you notice is the language, because our French, we have a really strong accent, and with our colleague from Italy and from Czech, that was the first, to be sure that within the project we are able to understand each other with this really strong French accent. But no, what we knew from our experiences is that we are a lab. It's specialized in conservation, restoration of archaeological artifacts, and we have research program applied to this kind of heritage. So we really used to work on a multidisciplinary chain with the archaeologue, with the curators, within the researchers. So it's kind of a mix we're used to. So we already face the challenge, and the people we asked to join us on this collaboration, we are used to work together. So they know that because conservation with restoration has ethical standards, and for the scientists, sometimes it's difficult to understand that the layer must be removed without modify the materials. And so, but once time it's set, so that's the main challenges when you're interdisciplinary. It's to understand ethical boundaries within the different scales of topics. Okay, that's the first one. And the second one, but with the help of the JPI, we faced this challenge. It was money. Because stakeholders, and especially associations or small museum, usually they don't have not so much money to be part of a team, a group. So with the help of the JPI grant, we were able to pay for them, to be a part, a real part of the project. And in fact, today we're in Toulouse having a brainstorming with all our partners. And well, with the help of the JPI, we were able to make everyone come and interact. So to face this challenge you were talking about.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And before I pass the floor to Egle, I would like now to ask the participants that if you have any questions, please start putting them into the chat line now, so that by the time Egle finishes her response, I can turn to the chat line for questions. If there are no questions, then we will continue our conversation and discussion and debate among our speakers. But I do hope you will use this opportunity to interject with questions, please, and comments, of course. So Egle, your views, please, on the challenges of collaborating across different sectors.
Thank you very much for this really excellent question. When it comes to collaborating with researchers from different disciplines, I must say that our project has been usefully situated in a very kind of turbulent emerging research area, which is already quite multidisciplinary. So I'm talking about the emergence of environmental humanities, about science and technology studies, about all the mixtures of approaches to heritage, both sociologically, historically, and so on. So all of these, and the history and technology studies, of course. So all of these are necessarily multi or interdisciplinary already, and our team are quite interdisciplinary. And we find this being, apart from the volume of literature to read, a very stimulating challenge rather than something that needs to be overcome. Now, when collaborating with the nuclear industry, there is a lot of scope to learn for all sides. And as many of you might know, nuclear industry, usually they are one of very like the world in their own right, so like the state within the state. we're used to talking to other nuclear physicists and engineers. We are not necessarily used to talking to a museum curator or a historian or an ethnographer. But now we are getting interested in doing that, now that legal frameworks are being reinterpreted. So for instance, even the International Atomic Energy Agency, now we are emphasizing that archive building and elements of heritage preservation should be included into the strategy of nuclear decommissioning. So there is a push from the inside of the industry towards opening up and including in a more substantive way different types of actors in this process. Now, how to do that, and especially when these actors come from critical humanities studies, particularly critical heritage management studies, and how can we as critical scholars inform the practices of nuclear industry and nuclear communities. So this is a challenge, and it will be therefore really exciting to kind of look for new frameworks of how to approach the making of nuclear cultural heritage together with our stakeholders, so that we do not lose our critical edge and our research is still useful. And maybe that will open new avenues for asking different questions from our perspective as social and humanities scholars. So that will be genuinely the most innovative part of this project, finding the ways of combining critical knowledge and practice.
There was mention by one of the speakers about the development of guidelines. And I just wondered whether, given how new some of the fields are, I take on board what Dante said about how well established digital humanities is, but that is, there is a range, a spectrum of how well these fields are established, how the role of guidelines, not only for those of us who are immersed in the field, but for others who ought to be informed by the work that we're doing, whether that could be scoped out and become a regular feature of an impact product, so to speak, of the research that we do. Because having been involved with several guidelines over a number of years, it's funny where they end up. You see them in the most unlikely places and being used quite widely. And I do think that guidelines are extremely useful when they're written for appropriately for different audiences. I see that we haven't got any questions yet, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat line. But I do have a question that was raised by Dante, in fact, which I would like to open up for further comment by the speakers. And that relates to technologies, and I'm going to use that word very broadly, the word technologies, that heritage professionals can borrow from other domains to support authorities to better preserve heritage assets under both natural and man-made threats. And I wonder, Dante, whether you could explore a little bit the question that you put as a topic for discussion with us all. Yes,
basically, I feel like sometimes the technologies we reached like I would say a situation that where we are not moving forward very much. So inventing new tools is not as straightforward as it can sound. So there are a lot of technologies out there that are basically used for totally different domains, which can be used also in heritage protection. That's where SHIELD comes from. I'm not saying that SHIELD, we are building something that has never been invented in the world. There are some kind of prototypes. But when we think about heritage protection, we have to deal with, okay, authorities that do not have a lot of budget to deal with. So they have to go through affordable solutions borrowed from other domains that can be used for the protection of heritage. That's where the SHIELD project was born, basically, to trying to build something that can be user-friendly taken with the proper account, affordable for, and basically cost-effective. At the same time, I'm struggling actually. I have in mind some technologies that can be borrowed from surveillance, let's say. So all the security that has been, and now it's very in fashion. We have to protect European borders. We have to protect a lot of domains, cybersecurity, which can be borrowed and used to protect heritage from, as I say, from criminals, basically.
So to what extent do you think that, as well as borrowing from other disciplines and other sectors, we might actually create something that is uniquely heritage that might actually be of use to other sectors? So as well as borrowing, contributing something as well, so that there is more of an exchange, and where heritage technologies and the heritage field becomes established in its own right as making a unique contribution as well.
Well, not to go too much off topic, but we are running another project that is dealing still with illicit trafficking. But while for SHIELD, we want to tackle basically the damage to heritage before it happened. Because there are a lot of technology, like, I was reading the chat, satellite imaging. They are monitoring looted heritage site after the destruction, when basically the artifacts are gone and the damage is done. We want to be the step forward to try to stop it. At the same time, the other project that I'm dealing with, it's when these artifacts are sold online. So in this case, we are using artificial intelligence to identify illicit auctions online. So still we are borrowing from the IT domain, but until a certain extent, because while the while the artificial intelligence is going to identify artifacts, they cannot say if an artifact is original or is a forge. So at that moment, the archaeologist or the professional with the humanities background is stepping in to make the difference, to say this is a forge or this is an original artifact.
It's also possible that we refine a technique or a technology to an extent that the refinement becomes a unique contribution. So we are dealing with heritage, which requires a level of accuracy which other sectors may not find initially useful, but which, say, for example, in the imaging field, certainly I've been involved with projects with companies which we have used their technology in the first instance, refined it for heritage, but then that refinement has given a market advantage to that company because of the refinement that we were able to do together with them. So it is a bit of a circular benefit. There is a circular value in that. I wonder whether I could bring Egle in, whether you have any comments to make on this mutual contribution between heritage and non-heritage.
Yes, absolutely, May. I'm in a complete agreement with you, and I just would like to add that as one of the ambitions of New Spaces is to show that the heritage approach, widely conceived, could be considered as an intellectual technology in its own right. Maybe when you are coming from within the field, it's difficult to see it, but I'm myself interdisciplinary scholar, and I've been shifting between art history and cultural studies, and then the historian of science and technology and governance. And I see that heritage practice presents a very particular set, offers a very particular form of valuation and creation of value, which is really key for lots of contemporary companies, and especially in the context of nuclear decommissioning. What kind of values can be attributed to different objects? And when we are talking about radioactive waste, these are not just safety values, but also different reuse values, even if they are far in the future. Also, heritage as a social practice, going back to Foucault, of course, is an intellectual technology, not necessarily a bad one, so to speak, not necessarily top down, but when looking into the making of nuclear cultural heritage, it's amazing how grassroots it is. So it's never the directors of the companies that come with the idea, let's preserve something. It's always engineers, scientists, people who are working on the ground, so to speak. So our experimental idea is to consider heritage in the nuclear decommissioning process as a potential intellectual technology that could help open up and democratize the whole nuclear industry. So it's hyper ambitious, but hopefully we'll make some small steps towards that. And that applies not just to nuclear industry. I think that it's a beautiful way of working with material cultures, with different grassroots communities, and having conversations between different stakeholders groups when they're essentially about values and centered around objects.
I have one final question before we close, and I'm going to pitch it to any of the speakers who might like to take this question. And it's quite a general one in some way, so I don't want us to go over time because I'm a stickler for sticking to time. So literally we have 2 minutes before our hour ends, but I would like to ask, what in your experience has been the most effective way of engaging with your end users? What do you feel, if you could offer the participants some words of wisdom as you embark on these projects, what would you say has worked best for you in the past in terms of engaging with your end users or stakeholders? Dante, I'm going to start with you again because you were the first speaker, and then I'll go around the table.
To be extremely concise because we don't have time. Actually, I would say it depends on the stakeholder we were dealing with, because we have dealt with someone that wanted to know step by step what we were doing, almost in like maniacal way. The other way, we were dealing with someone that say, okay, you got the money, nice, I like your idea, show me the final product. So it's kind of tricky to say. It depends really on my experience with who we were dealing with, what they want us to show them.
Okay, thank you very much. Elodie, or your colleague, if you could just tell us a little bit. You are in Toulouse.
Okay.
You are meeting with your.
Yes.
You are in Toulouse already. You are meeting with your stakeholders, so you can give us, I'm sure, a great example.
Well, I would say that the first step was the first step has to be their questions, their purpose, what they are looking for, what are their problems, what are their challenges, and within this debut, we were able to put it in our project and to make it one of our outcomes. So they stick with us because they know already we're gonna give them answers. And if not, we did look into them. I don't know if I make it clear, but
it is clear. It is clear. Egle, I am going to cut you off, I'm afraid, because it is 1:30. It's 1:30 in London, it's 2:30 where you are, so I apologize for my mistake. But I would like to thank the three of you, Elodie, Dante, Egle, for your fantastic presentations. You well kept to time. You made my job very easy. We had time for questions and answers. I feel I've got to know you, and I would like to wish you great success with your projects, because I'm sure that we will hear about them over the next months and years. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for attending this roundtable. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, May, and I'm sorry I had some problems with my microphone earlier in the afternoon. I wasn't able to introduce you as I should have done. I'm very sorry. That was a great discussion, and thank you very much for that. Very enlightening, very interesting discussion, and a lot of, again, challenges to be met. And thank you for keeping the time as well. That's